Hello everyone and welcome to SplitSecond. Before starting, we would like to especially thank Izanagi, Stewart972 and TJ Rapp for supporting the channel on Patreon for 2 years now, and to celebrate, this week we received TJ Rapp to play with us. Baal is piloting Tayam, the Luminous Grindstone from Tuukka, Hélder brought his Yoshimaru Rograkh combo list, Rodrigo brought his anti-creature Ishai Tevesh list, and our guest of honor TJ brought his own Tymna Thrasios list. Before we show his starting hands, we would like to remind you that tomorrow some of us will be spending the afternoon playing some games at Kingdoms TV, so if you want to see that, come join us on the Kingdoms TV Twitch page. Baal is going first and Emulgan down to 6, not wanting to go lower. Flooded Strand, Wooded Foothills and Boseiju, who endures all, are his lands. Mox Diamond for ramp and Weatherer Wayfarer might help him find key lands, although being first it's hard to have it online. Mana Gorger is a good creature to keep removing counters from Tayam, and he sent to the bottom Peacekeeper. Hélder mulligan once, and he kept a Sacred Foundry, Plateau and a Lucky Gemstone Caverns, which will boost his turn 1 a lot, especially with Mox Ember as well. Jeska's Will can be quite juicy on turn 2, and he still has Magda for extra value and shooting Curio into play, and if it all goes south, Underworld Breach can be the backup plan. Rodrigo kept his first 7 with an Ancient Tomb and Scalding Tarns for lands. Curse Totem hitting play as early as turn 1 can heavily affect the green decks. Wishclaw Talisman to pivot his game plan, Mental Misstep and Mana Drain for interaction, and Ocean Thief is lacking 1 land to hit play as early as turn 3, slowing Tymna's engine. Finally, we have TJ, who was unfortunate to have to mulligan down to 5, with an Underground Sea, Bayou and Tropical Islands for lands. Bloom Tender for some ramp and Granite Magistrate might unfortunately hit the field too late. He sent to the bottom Flooded Strand and Quirion Ranger. Ready for the match? Before the game starts, Hélder reveals his Gemstone Caverns, putting into play and exiling Mad the Brazen Outlaw. Baal then starts his turn playing a Wooded Foothills and cracking it for a Savannah. He then casts a Mox Diamond, discarding a Flooded Strand, and casts a Weathered Wayfarer, passing the turn. Hélder plays a Plateau and casts his commander, Yoshimaru Ever Faithful. He then casts his other commander, Rograkh, son of Rograkh, entering and triggering Yoshimaru. He still goes ahead with a Mox Ember, once again triggering Yoshimaru and passing. Rodrigo plays an Ancient Tomb and casts a Curse Totem, passing right after. TJ gets to his turn, plays an Underground Sea and passes. Baal draws and does play his Boseiju, as he expects this to be a long game, as well as it will allow him to cast Mana Gorger Hydra, which can start growing to be a menace to Tevesh. He still attacks Rodrigo and passes. Hélder found a land, a Wooded Foothills, which he cracks to find a mountain. He probes hand sizes just before casting a Jeska's Will, targeting Rodrigo, triggering Hydra for a counter, and gaining 6 red mana and exiling the top 3 cards from his library. He didn't find much, but Norin the Wary is a good hit, and he casts it right away, triggering Hydra for a counter. However, Rodrigo responds with a Mental Misstep, triggering Hydra for a counter. Hélder is not done just yet though, as he casts a Sword of Light and Shadow, triggering Hydra, and it does resolve, so he equips it onto Yoshi, the good boy, prompting some defensive arguments from Rodrigo that he is not on Naus nor Pier. However, TJ being down to a mull to 5 and Baal having an Hydra that can block Yoshi means that Rodrigo will be the receiving end of the stick. Sword triggers and Hélder gains 3 life and returns Norin to his hand, which he casts in his second main phase, triggering Hydra on cast and Yoshi on ETB. He still casts his Ornithopter, triggering Norin to be exiled and Hydra for another counter. He goes to his end step and Norin returns from hiding and triggers Yoshi again. Rodrigo plays his Scalding Tarn and cracks it for an Underground Sea. He casts his Wishclaw Talisman, triggering George and Norin to be exiled. Dang it, this will be a tough one to narrate. He activates the talisman right away, searching for a Toxic Deluge, and passing it to TJ as he is quite behind. In his end step, Norin returns and triggers Yoshi again. We're back to TJ and he's slowly trying to get some presence in the game. He plays a Tropical Island and casts a Bloom Tender, triggering George and Norin. He passes afterwards and Norin returns to play, feeding the dog. Baal top decks a Command Tower, sadly 1 turn too late. He ponders his options and does cast Eidolon of Rhetoric, triggering George and Norin. It will slow his Hydra's growth, but might as well do it to prevent Hélder from going for his Curio lines. He passes without attacking as he can block Dogo, which just grew to Norin's ETB once again. Hélder gets to his turn and casts a Hammer of Nazan, triggering Norin and George. It resolves and triggers to be attached to Yoshi. He then attacks Rodrigo, who instantly responds with a free Submerge on Yoshi, triggering George for another counter. Hélder does put Yoshi in the command zone to be safer and passes, returning Norin to play. Rodrigo probes Baal's intentions behind that Hydra, and Baal is mainly looking to block or pressure Hélder, so Rodrigo casts an Arcane Signet, triggering George and Norin, and then plays a tapped Seagate Reborn, holding Toxic Deluge for later. Norin returns and we're back to TJ. He plays a Bayou and casts a Thrasios, triggering George and Norin, and passes the turn, returning Norin at end step. Baal finds another land, a Misty Rainforest, which he cracks for a forest, since the deck is on Earthcraft. He then casts his last card in hand, Dense Foliage, triggering George and Norin. He hopes to save George enough time to pressure Hélder and Rodrigo while attempting to recoup some cards. He goes ahead and attacks Hélder, as he had somewhat told Rodrigo he wasn't going to attack him right away, since Hélder has more aggro potential towards Rodrigo as well, and Baal would need Rodrigo to have Hélder in check. Norin returns and we're back to Hélder. He plays an untapped Sacred Foundry paying 2 life, and then he equips Hammer of Nazan to Rograkh to have an indestructible blocker and still casts Shadow Spear, triggering Norin and George. It enters and triggers the hammer, which allows it to be attached to Rograkh. Norin returns at end step and it's now Rodrigo's turn. He double checks Managorge's Hydra's counters and casts a Toxic Deluge paying 17 life, as the Hydra's trigger just grows it to 17. Norin avoids this massive board wipe and returns again in the end step. TJ casts a Mana Crypt, triggering Norin, and uses it to activate Witchclaw Talisman, passing it to Baal. He tutors for a Tundra, as he is in desperate need for white mana, having mistaken his duels in the opening hand. He plays the Tundra and casts the Drenith Magistrate. Norin does his peekaboo thingy and we're back to Baal. He draws and considers his tutor options. He ends up just casting Archon of Emeria and passing. Yeah, Norin did his thing. Hélder starts his turn with a dashed Ragavan, triggering Norin. He then equips the monkey with a sword and proceeds to attack Baal, connecting and triggering the sword for 3 life and returning Ornithopter to hand, and then Ragavan exiling an Imperial Seal, so he can't cast it, and ends his turn returning Norin to play. Rodrigo is still not finding any lands, and his last hope is Liliana, asking TJ and Baal not to attack her, to deal with Norin who just ran away. He upticks her, targeting Archon of Emeria and passes. TJ rolls and takes 3 from the crypt. He plays a tapped Cephalid Coliseum and then casts his Tymna the Weaver, proceeding to combat, sending Drenith towards Hélder, and on his second main phase Tymna triggers and he pays 1 life to draw a card. He passes, Norin returns, and we are on turn 6 of a possible quite long game. Baal top decks an Emergence Zone, which he plays. He then activates Witchclaw Talisman, giving it to Hélder since he has Dockside and it's 1 less treasure generator. He searches for a Pernicious Deed, which he casts right away, scaring Norin away and finding a way to get out of Curse Totem and Drenith. Norin returns and Hélder starts his turn. With Deed on the board, he does go for the Ragavan plan. Norin triggers and then Hélder equips the Ragavan with the Sword of Light and Shadow Spear as well, attacking Baal with them. Some discussion arises on the best timing to crack the deed and Baal ends up doing it now. Without further actions, Norin returns and Hélder passes. Rodrigo draws and still no lands to be found. He upticks Liliana on Tymna to decrease her card draw potential, despite having a shot at Norin, who is pestering this whole game narration. TJ draws, casts Faeboro Hélder and passes, so Norin is back as well. Baal gets to his turn and attacks Liliana directly, having considered Rodrigo's life would be easier to take down, but having him alive a couple of more turns might be helpful. He then plays his Drawn Bayou and passes with access to Emergence Zone. Norin returns and Hélder is also looking for ways to get back into the game. He casts Ornithopter and equips him with the Hammer of Nazan to have an indestructible blocker, before passing. Rodrigo is hanging by a thread, upticking Liliana on Tymna and passing, complaining how Dense Foliage completely changed the pace of the game. TJ draws and goes to combat, attacking Baal for 3, scaring Norin away, since most of the cards in his hand do target, and Defense Foliage is preventing that. In his second main phase, Tymna triggers and he pays 1 life to draw a card. He casts his Thrasios, and before Norin returns, Baal cracks his Emergence Zone to be able to cast his commander, Tayam. Baal had waited this long since Rodrigo had mentioned he's packing more Wraths in this deck. Baal draws and jumps to combat, attacking Rodrigo in the air to remove Ancient Tomb's potential, and Tayam goes towards TJ. On his second main phase, Baal casts Drum Bellower, entering with a Vigilance counter from Tayam and passing. Hélder gets to his turn and equips the sword on the Thopter, sending it flying towards Baal. Baal mentions he should attack TJ, as he's probably running Serra Ascendant. The sword triggers for 3 life and returns Ragavan to his hand, which he casts in the second main phase. We're back to Rodrigo's unlucky draws. He upticks Liliana, targeting Tymna and passes without any further possible actions. On his end step, TJ activates Thrasios, scrying and revealing a Serra Ascendant, to much of Baal's dismay. TJ draws and casts his Serra Ascendant right away. He then goes to combat and sends the Faeboro towards Rodrigo, and no one can save him, so he flashes in his Notion Thief, hoping to survive. However, still before blockers, TJ channels an Ottawara Soaring City on the Thief, leaving Rodrigo defenseless and becoming our first casualty. And on his second main phase, Tymna triggers and he pays 1 life to draw a card, before passing. Baal draws and goes to combat, attacking Hélder for not attacking TJ last turn. On his second main phase, he casts his top deck Luros, entering with a vigilance counter and passing. Hélder draws, plays a plains and casts his Yoshimaru, triggering Norin, and here we go again. He then goes to combat and attacks TJ with the Ornithopter, since it has protection from white. However, TJ casts an Abrupt Decay on the sword, and is now able to block the Thopter with his Serra Ascendant. During the conversation here, TJ announces he wants to activate Thrasios still in combat, before losing his mana, which doesn't quite work the way we wanted, since mana pools empty at the end of each step, so he tapped Faboro before blocking and then blocked gaining life, so he wouldn't have any more mana in the pool, but we were all goofing around at that moment and it doesn't change much of the outcome. He reveals an Eldritch Evolution to his hand and Hélder passes, returning Norin to play, triggering Yoshi. We are on TJ's turn now and he goes into combat, attacking Baal in the air with the Ascendant. Tymna then triggers and he pays 1 life to draw a card. He then casts his spell for the turn, a Rhystic Study. In his end step, Norin returns, triggering Yoshi again. Baal top decks another land, so he casts his Weather Wayfarer from the graveyard through Lurrus, entering with a vigilance counter on it. Rhystic also triggers and he pays for it. He then sends his army towards TJ for exact 10 damage, hoping to shut down Ascendant offline. In his end step, Norin returns to feed the dog. Hélder draws and ponders his attacks. Baal proposes to let Ragavan go through, so Hélder can maybe find something from his deck. But while Hélder also wants to take Archon, Baal won't block it, so the other 2 creatures go towards TJ, who activates Thrasios looking for something. He scries to the bottom and reveals a Mana Confluence, coming into play tapped. Damage connects and Ragavan triggers, exiling a Mana Crypt, which Hélder casts in his second main phase, triggering Rhystic and paying for it. In his end step, TJ casts a Chain of Vapor in the dense foliage, and Baal does copy it, sacrificing his forest to bounce Faboro Hélder, hoping to delay TJ's dominance. The chain is stopped and Norin returns, triggering Yoshi. TJ gets to his turn and casts a Gilded Drake, entering and targeting Archon of Emeria, as he hopes to get rid of it next turn with his Eldritch Evolution. He then attacks Hélder with Tymna, triggering her in the second main phase to draw a card, passing afterwards. Before Norin re-enters, Baal activates Tayam, removing the vigilance counters from his creatures. He sadly mills 3 lands and returns his Mana Gorger to play, actually forgetting the vigilance counter. Norin returns, Yoshi grows bigger and TJ discards Neoform at cleanup. Baal gets to his turn and attacks TJ with Gilded Drake, which he lets go through. In the second main phase, he activates Weather Wayfarer, searching for a plains, since Cradle would come in tapped. He plays it and casts an Holosaur Shepherd, triggering George and Rhystic, and not paying, to have mana for a Tayam activation. Norin returns, feeding the dog, and we're back to Hélder. He rolls for the Crypt and takes 3. With dense foliage out of the way, he finally found a way out. He casts a Chandra's Ignition, targeting Yoshimaru to hopefully clear the board. Rhystic and George trigger and he does pay for the Rhystic. However, to his disappointment, TJ responds with a Force of Will, pitching an Oshok Dream Render, also triggering George. Still locked under the rule of law, Hélder attacks TJ with Yoshi, and TJ cracks his Cephalid Coliseum, targeting him to dig for answers. He discards 3 cards and chump blocks with his Serra Ascendant. In the end step, Norin returns and Yoshi gets another counter. TJ gets to his turn and casts his Eldritch Evolution right away, sacrificing Archon of Emirian as an additional cost, triggering Hydra for a counter. In response, however, Baal activates Tayam, milling 3 cards and returning the Archon to play once again, preventing TJ from going for a Thoracle win, as he can't cast more spells. This way, he searches for a Seedborn Muse to grind the match a bit more. Here comes Norin! Yeah, Yoshi hits another bone and we are on turn 12 now. Baal was expecting to be able to fetch for a Cradle now, but the Cephalids being cracked prevents him from doing so, and the milled cards from Tayam have been pretty mediocre, so he just attacks TJ for 7 in the air, and on his second main phase he plays a Silent Clearing and passes. Before Norin returns from exile, TJ activates Thrasios, scrying to the bottom and revealing a Culling Ritual, which doesn't help his intent of not looking like the archenemy. Norin then returns and boosts Yoshi. Hélder rolls and loses the crit roll once again. He finds a good one this time, a Jeska Thrice Reborn. Rhystic and George trigger and he pays for it. With so many creatures on the board, he has to down-tick her and targets Thrasios, Tayam and Archon of Emeria. Baal responds by activating Tayam, once again milling mediocre cards and being forced to return Eidolon of Rhetoric, entering with a vigilance counter and remembering how that other vigilance counter missed earlier hinders him hard at this precise moment. TJ still responds with a Thrasios activation, scrying to the bottom and revealing a Force of Negation. Hélder thought he had it, but forgot about that other rule of law, so now he attacks TJ, forcing to choose between his creatures, but TJ still has a Deadly Rolling up his sleeve to say no. The Hydra gets another counter and Hélder passes, returning Norin to a Yoshi-free board. TJ is missing a land for his Thrasios, so he casts an Arcane Signet, triggering George and scaring Norin for a bit as he passes right after. Baal still cracks his silent clearing to draw a card before going to his turn. He casts an Avacyn's Pilgrim to pump his Hydra, triggering Rhystic as well and paying for it. He then goes to combat, and not having great answers for his opponents in hand, he divides damage, 5 at each player. In the end step, Norrin returns and we're back to Hélder rolling for Baal's Mana Crypt. It's the third time he loses it. Maybe next time don't steal Mana Crypts from Baal's library. He casts an Umezawa's GT, triggering Rhystic and George, and he does pay for it. He equips it to his Thopter, but being a bit low on life, he decides not to attack, and on his end step, TJ flashes in an opposition agent, and then Norrin returns. TJ draws and casts a Mystic Remora, triggering George, and then he passes, returning the vanishing Norrin. Baal draws into a Jeweled Lotus, which messes with the math in his head for good. He ponders attacks for a moment and sends 5 flying damage towards TJ and Eidolon and Hydra towards Hélder, considering he was going to double block the Rule of Law. However, Hélder blocks Eidolon with Ragavan only, and the indestructible Thopter blocks the Hydra, gaining 2 counters on the GT. On his second main phase, Eidolon is still alive, so Baal passes, and only then Hélder activates GT, removing both counters to kill Eidolon, giving it -2/-2. Norrin then returns and Hélder goes to his turn. He rolls and once again loses the crit roll, 4 out of 4. He wants to go for it, but the Force of Negation from TJ might be the last nail in the coffin. He casts the Dockside Extortionist, triggering Rhystic and George, and he pays for it. It enters and he gains 3 treasures. Then he slowly casts the Cloudstone Curio, triggering Remora, Rhystic and the Hydra, and TJ shows him not the Fawn but the Deadly Silence. He then pays for the Rhystic but not for the Remora, and does not attack to maintain blockers. Before Norrin comes back, TJ casts a Vampiric Tutor, searching for a Tainted Pact. TJ then gets to his turn and lets the Remora go. He then casts the Culling Ritual right away, triggering the Hydra. Baal floats green and Hélder cracks his treasures as well to float red mana. TJ gets 9 floating mana and casts a Finale of Devastation, X = 2. George gets another counter and then TJ searches for a Thassa's Oracle to play, entering and triggering, and he responds to it with a Tainted Pact, for another counter on George and a win to TJ. GG. Thank you for joining us for today's match, everyone. This was quite a grindy match held by the power of Rule of Law effects, most of the time defended by dense foliage. Even TJ couldn't combo since Freed from the Real does target. Mana Gorger Hydra was a big menace most of the time and Norrin was a hindrance to narrate, but still added 4 power per turn cycle. However, plenty of removal held Yoshi at bay. It also goes to show the more grindy matches get, the more important all combat phases become. We'd like to start the credits by thanking our current patrons, and especially Izanagi, TJ Rapp, Mike Purr, Aejimu, Drunken Cat, V, RJ, Heated Shield, Pina, Ricardo, Dragonstake, Katerina, Michael Bowen, Super Scaldi, Dog, Wyatt and Wicked, our stack breakers. If you want to support us, you can do so by liking this video, subscribing or by becoming a patron yourself. If you want to go through other Commander adventures, click one of the videos on the right. If you want to talk with us about our games or other EDH related matters, join us on Discord. Join us again next week for a new set of commanders and more decisive plays. See you all then.